There's a story I want to read for you as we start today. It's true, and it's one of the most powerful things I've ever read about being a father. It's recorded in Pat Morley's book, Man in the Mirror. Here it is. It was the kind of fishing trip you'd dream about. Salmon were practically leaping onto the hooks of the four men who had flown into a remote Alaskan bay. They hit the jackpot, fish after fish all day long. The next morning, they loaded their gear into a seaplane for what they assumed would be a routine takeoff. But as the pilot accelerated, he noticed something was off. One of the pontoons had filled with water. Just moments after lifting into the air, the weight of the water caused the plane to veer into a dangerous turn and crash into the icy sea. Now they were in serious trouble. Far from land and fighting freezing currents, two of the men swam with everything they had and made it to shore exhausted but alive. The other two were Dr. Phil Littleford and his 12-year-old son, Mark. Both were decent swimmers, but Mark, just a boy, wasn't physically strong enough to overcome the current, no matter how hard he tried. When the two survivors turned around from the shore, they saw a sight that would mark them for the rest of their lives. Dr. Littleford, fully capable of saving himself, chose instead to stay with his son, Mark. Mark couldn't make it, and his father chose not to leave. He held his boy close, and together they drifted into the open sea, disappearing and dying in each other's arms. Now, I'm not ashamed to admit that I got choked up the first time I read that. I'd like to think I'd make the same decision as that dad. I'm sure you would too. Not because we're heroes, not because we've got some unique brand of courage, but because of something wired deep inside us, a father's heart, that irrational, sacrificial, overwhelming love that God builds into men when they become dads. Most of us would die for our kids, no question. And I think most of us hearing that story feel it immediately, that recognition. Yes, that's exactly what I would do. But I want to stay with that for a minute because I think it reveals something important about who we are as fathers and something important about the gap between the father we feel ourselves to be on the inside and the father we actually show up as on an ordinary Wednesday. A father's love doesn't just show up in a crisis. It's in the heart of a man who wraps up work early because he can't wait to get home to see his kids. It's in the dad throwing a baseball with his son on a Sunday morning, or sitting in the third row at his daughter's dance recital, trying not to cry. That impulse, that pull toward your children is real, and it runs deep. It's also more than a feeling. What Dr. Littleford did in that Alaskan bay was the ultimate expression of something most fathers carry quietly every day, a sense that your child's well-being is bound up with your own, that their flourishing matters to you more than your comfort, more than your convenience, and more than your plans for the afternoon. And that same integrity, that sense of acting consistent with something you deeply believe, is what gets tested in the smaller moments too. The moment you walk past the driveway instead of stopping, the moment you half listen instead of really hearing, the moment you're physically in the room but mentally someplace else. Nobody's life is on the line. There's no crisis forcing a decision, but a choice is being made nonetheless. And over time, those quiet choices shape the kind of father you're becoming, whether you're paying attention to them or not. Now, that's what makes the father's heart such an important place to start. That's what we're talking about today. Because most dads, the ones I've known, the ones I've walked alongside in ministry for 25 years, they have it. The love there is genuine. The desire to be a great dad is real. The problem isn't the heart. The problem is the gap between what we feel and what we actually do with it. And that gap for most men doesn't happen all at once. That gap opens slowly. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Somewhere between that love we feel and the daily reality of raising kids, a lot of good men quietly lose their way. Not all at once, not dramatically. It's slow, incremental. The demands of work, the chaos of raising kids, the constant pressure to provide, they can drown out the deeper call to be fully present as a father. In managing the moment, we forget the mission. And over time, that drift turns into a kind of numbness, just hydroplaning through the years until one day those years are gone. And so are our kids. Because the men who drift, and I've sat across from a lot of them over the years, they weren't bad fathers. They weren't checked out on purpose. They were busy. They were building careers. They were trying to provide, trying to keep up, trying to get ahead. And all of it felt justified in the moment, necessary even. And most of it was. That's the honest complexity of being a father in the middle of a full life. The things that pull you away from your kids aren't usually bad things. They're responsibilities, obligations, opportunities that feel important because they are important. The promotion that requires more travel, the season of long hours that stretched into years, the habit of coming home depleted and needing to decompress, which is understandable, except that decompression became the default. A real engagement became the exception. The family then gets leftovers. And nobody called it drift. It just looked like a busy dad doing his very best. Meanwhile, the kids kept growing. The window kept closing. And it happened so gradually that there was never a clear moment where a man could say, this is the point where I lost my mission. He just looked up one day and realized the window was closed. That's what drift looks like from the inside. It doesn't look like a man who doesn't care. It looks like a man who cares deeply and is also overwhelmed and who keeps telling himself he'll be more present when things settle down. But things don't settle down. Life doesn't eventually clear enough space for you to start being the father you've always meant to be. You have to decide to be that father in the middle of the full, demanding, complicated life you're already living. I know because I've been that man. Let me tell you about a story, something that happened with my child that I still remember today. I had just come home from a long, emotionally draining day as a pastor. You know what that's like, whether you're a pastor or not. As I walked past the driveway, Ryan, 10 years old at the time, was dribbling and shooting baskets. He looked up and said, "Hey, Dad, want to play?" "No, I'm tired," I said gruffly. "Did you finish your homework?" "Yeah," he said, and I walked on into the house. About 30 minutes later, as I sat on the couch with the TV on, I could hear him through the kitchen window. Ryan was still out there, still shooting, still alone. My heart sank. What am I doing? I said to myself. I got up, went out to the driveway, and started rebounding for him. He showed me a couple of new skills that he'd been working on. I encouraged him, and soon it became dark and we went inside. I could have easily missed that ordinary but important moment, and all it took was 20 minutes to show my son that he mattered. You know, kids don't really need much. They don't need more stuff or a bigger house, but they do need to feel that they're the most important thing in your world. And proving that can be as simple as stopping what you're doing, turning around, and showing up. That night, I caught it. I turned around and went to him, but I know I didn't always. I know I wasn't always as aware as I was that night. I know there were likely plenty of times when I stayed on the couch or walked by and didn't even realize what was happening, because drift is like that. It's not a single decision. It's 1,000 small ones, each one feeling reasonable, adding up to something you never intended. I say this not to beat you up, but to name it so we can heal it. And I'm not talking about perfection. We're not going to get it right every time. We're not going to see it every time. We're not supposed to carry the responsibility for always entertaining our kids. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a drift that slowly begins to define the substance of a man's life, and that's where it becomes dangerous. But there's another dynamic often going on, something I've learned from years of working with fathers and from honest reflection on my own life. For many dads, the inability to engage runs deeper than busyness. It goes further back than the pressures of this particular season. Old wounds, buried insecurities, and emotional patterns formed in childhood quietly pull at our ability to connect, leaving a father unsure of how to step fully into his role or unaware there's even a need to. I've sat with men who were raised by emotionally distant fathers and who genuinely didn't know what warmth and presence were supposed to look like in practice. Not because they didn't want it for their kids. They wanted it desperately, but they had no template for it, no model. They were trying to give their children something they had never received themselves, and that is genuinely hard work. I've sat with men whose childhood homes were marked by conflict, chaos, absence, or who carried into their own fathering a fear they couldn't quite name, a fear of doing it wrong, a fear of being too soft or too hard or not enough, a fear that if they got too close, something would eventually go sideways, because in their experience, closeness had a way of ending badly. Those men weren't drifting because they were selfish. They were drifting because they were wounded, and wounds left unexamined, have a way of quietly running the show. Now again, please hear me. This isn't about shame. Every man sitting with this right now has a story, and most of those stories include things he didn't choose and couldn't control. The family he was born into, the father he had or didn't have, the emotional language he was or wasn't taught, none of that disqualifies you. But it does mean that becoming the father you want to be sometimes requires more than good intentions. It requires the kind of honest self-examination that most men find uncomfortable. Looking at not just what you do, but why you react the way you do. Asking not just, what kind of father do I want to be, but also asking, what is it in me that is getting in the way? That's harder work than showing up in the driveway. But it's just as important. Because a father who is fathering out of his wounds, even a loving, committed, well-intentioned father, will eventually pass those wounds along, not on purpose, but by default. And a father who does the work of fathering from a place of healing and self-awareness, he instead gives his kids something that can't be manufactured. He gives them a man who knows himself, who is growing, who is present in the fullest sense of the word. And that's the central question this episode is really all about. Not whether you love your kids. That love is real. I believe that about you dads who are listening. But whether the gap between what you feel for your children and how you actually show up for them is wider than you'd like to admit. And whether that gap has been quietly growing through busyness, through exhaustion, through the accumulated weight of a full life, or through patterns that go back further than you may have stopped to consider. Because the father's heart is not the problem. Most dads have it. The question is whether we're willing to let that love become something more than a feeling, whether we're willing to let it become a decision, a purpose that shapes what we actually do when life is loud and when we're tired and when the driveway is waiting. That's what intentional fathering is. Not perfect fathering, not fathering without failure, but fathering with your eyes open, with an honest account of what pulls you away, and with a clear enough vision of where you're going that you keep finding your way back. To embrace a mission that keeps you swimming against the current of where life is trying to take you, and that is away from your kids. So next week, we talk about a purpose worth pursuing, that mission that keeps us in the fight. And that mission is becoming your child's father friend. I'm going to explain it deeply, and we're going to look at it in detail so you understand exactly what purpose to set before you. I hope you'll join me as we discuss the power of that purpose in a man's life. Hey, one more thing. Don't forget to sign up for the pre-orders of my new book, Father Friend, How Intentional Dads Lean In, Lead Well, and Love Big. Pre-orders are coming soon, and if you sign up now to be notified, you'll receive a free ebook version, a signed printed copy of the book when it releases. It'll be mailed and signed to the person of your choosing. And third, a chance to win a $100 gift card to your favorite father-child activity. But you've got to sign up before Father's Day, June 21st, to be eligible. You can do so by going to fatherfriend.net/book. Then this week, Dad, lean in, lead well, and love big.